What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me. And of course, I will be continuing my series here on my NHL 2021-2022 season predictions. And for today's video, we'll be talking about a team that was probably the most disappointing team in the entire NHL last season, and that would be the Philadelphia Flyers. So entering last season, the Philadelphia Flyers were considered a very solid team. They built themselves up as a powerhouse in the Eastern Conference, and entering that 2020 bubble, a lot of people pegged them as one of the favorites to win the Stanley Cup. Even though they fell short of that goal, dropping in the second round to the New York Islanders, there was still a lot of promise with this team for a team that was going to build themselves up as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender for the next decade. However, this past season, not only did they fail to realize that potential as a Stanley Cup contender, they did not even make the playoffs. They had a very miserable season. So taking a look at what they did last year, they finished with a 25-23-8 record for a very mediocre 58 points, which ranked 6th in the East Division, only at an 85-point pace over 82 games. Taking a look at their offensive stats, they averaged a 2.86 goals for per game, which ranked 15th in the NHL, and a 19.2 power play percentage, which was tied for 17th. And their defensive stats, this is where they really fell off. 3.52 goals against per game, which was dead last in the NHL at 31st, and a 73% penalty kill percentage, which was very close to the bottom at 30th. So a team that wasn't all that great offensively, although they weren't bad, but they were kind of sort of middle of the pack. But defensively, unquestionably one of, if not the worst teams in the NHL last season. So taking a look at their top 5 scorers last season, we actually have a 3-way tie for first. So first we're talking about James Van Riemsdyk, who in a full 56 games had 17 goals and 26 assists for 43 points. Now this was obviously a career year for JVR, as he's not really a guy that you would expect to produce at this level. However, considering that the Flyers were really up and down, James Van Riemsdyk definitely stepped up his game and was one of the more consistent Flyers. Then also we have Claude Giroud, who had 16 goals and 27 assists for 43 points in 54 games. I mean, he's the captain of this team. He's still solid as ever, and I would say that maybe he's past like the absolute peak of his career, but regardless, he's still a very solid player, and he's going to contribute some decent numbers for the next few years at the very least. And then finally, we got Jacob Voracek, who in 53 games had 9 goals and 34 assists for 43 points. One of the better playmaking wingers in the game still. Obviously, he's not the goal-scoring winger. I mean, he never really was. I mean, at his prime, he was a 20-goal scorer, but maybe those days are behind him. But still, he still contributes a ton of offense. He's very good with the puck. He's very good at feeding his teammates. Still a very solid guy statistically. And then in fourth, we have Sean Couturier, who in just 45 games had 18 goals and 23 assists for 41 points. Now, we all know that Couturier, when healthy, is one of the most complete two-way centers in this league. However, his health has always been a question mark. For some reason, he's just made of glass. Every year, he seems to miss significant time. But we all know when healthy, he's one of the elite players. I mean, nearly a point per game in an injury-riddled season. And if he can stay healthy, that is going to help the Flyers tremendously next season. And in fifth, we have a breakout season from Joel Fairby here. 55 games. He had 20 goals, which actually led the team, as well as 18 assists for 38 points. I mean, there was always some upside with this guy, and this was a very good sophomore season from him, goal-scoring-wise. And he definitely should be a perennial 20-goal scorer for the years to come. Take a look at the goaltending here, however. Not the prettiest sight. Now, Brian Elliott did get the majority of the starts. 30 games, a 15-9-2 record, so he had an above 500 record. However, a 3.06 goals against average and an 889 save percentage. And even though Brian Elliott is the backup of this team, it is very clear that he struggled. And although the defense didn't really give much support to these goaltenders, still just a miserable year in between the pipes. Take a look at Elliott's numbers. When you didn't think they could get any worse, take a look at Carter Hart's here. I mean, he was coming off a very solid rookie season. And this past year, 27 games played, he had a 9-11-5 record, a 3.67 goals against average, and an 877 save percentage. I mean, just an atrocious season for him. That was amongst the worst in the entire National Hockey League, statistically among goaltenders. And I mean, he is a very young and up-and-coming goaltender, and I still think he has potential to bounce back and be a really good goaltender in this league. But, you know, there was a lot of hype surrounding him. I think a lot of people thought he was going to have a really good season. And obviously, the Flyers were going to have a good season as a result, at least how many people predicted, including myself. I had this team winning the division, in part because of how, you know, Carter Hart was going to be their future netminder. And, you know, their search of, you know, number one goaltenders would be a thing of the past. But, things didn't work out. And even though a lot of people thought, he was going to win the Vezina even, like, that surely backfired. But yes, the goaltending was a big reason why the Flyers struggled, but they weren't the only reasons why. Defensively, they weren't very great. And, on offense, they weren't bad, but I still feel like there's more to give there. It was just very disappointing to see this team fall back to mediocrity once again. I honestly thought they were done with this pattern, but it looks as though they're not. Let's see if they bounce back next season, and we'll kind of dissect what they are moving forward here. So entering this season, obviously these Flyers are expected to bounce back and get back into the Stanley Cup playoffs like they always do every other year. They miss and then they make, and then they miss and then they make. So judging by the pattern, this season they should make the playoffs, but we'll see if it's good enough in a tougher Metropolitan division. Let's dissect the offseason moves. Based on what they did this offseason, you can make the case that on paper at least, this is an improved team. Now, judging by the moves, they did get a lot older and a lot more experience, so they shedded away some of their younger players. Philip Meyers being one of them, who was a young defenseman. I didn't think he was all that bad, but obviously he had a rough season and they saw an opportunity to ship him off to Nashville, so they did just that. And they also decided to trade Nolan Patrick to the Vegas Golden Knights. Had a ton of injury issues as well, but even when healthy, he really struggled to live up to the name as the number 2 overall pick. At this point, he's nothing more than a third-line center, and I don't know if he's ever going to be more than that, to be totally honest with you. They also got rid of Robert Hagg, who was another defenseman on this team, but like I said before, they made some upgrades, or so it appears at least. I guess their biggest loss would be losing Jacob Voracek. They decided to trade him off as well. Obviously, I don't think he was all that bad, but obviously they thought that maybe they got better with what they acquired in return. So Voracek, that playmaking is going to be missed, and, they could lose a little bit of production offensively, unless, the guy they acquired is going to provide more offense for them, which I guess is what they expect. We'll start with the forwards here that they gained. First, I'll mention Cam Atkinson, who was the guy acquired in exchange for Jacob Voracek. I'm not exactly sure if he's as good of an all-around player as he is, but I feel like you're going to get more goal scoring from him. Now, he is coming off not a bad season by any means, but he was playing on a really terrible Blue Jackets team. So maybe he can bounce back on a much better, more deeper Flyers offense, and he can be a perennial 20-goal scorer there. And that will definitely improve this Flyers team offensively. And they also added some depth at center, adding Derek Brassard, who should fit in really well in that third-line center role. Definitely going to improve their depth scoring quite a bit. And I also forgot to mention, with the departure of Brian Elliott, who decided to sign with the Tampa Bay Lightning, they need to go out and get another backup goaltender to replace him. So they ended up signing Martin Jones, who was initially the starting goaltender for the San Jose Sharks, but they brought in Jones to be the backup goaltender for this Flyers team, obviously backing up Carter Hart. I am a little bit skeptical when it comes to this signing, because he is not coming off the greatest seasons with San Jose, but maybe in a backup role where he gets less starts and there's less pressure on him, he could, play better and have better statistics. But I'm still a little bit skeptical, especially with Carter Hart, who's coming off a rough season. The goaltending, it's a little bit concerning, I will say. But the biggest thing this team was trying to address in the offseason was improving their defense. And I feel like, at least on paper, maybe they did. So first they signed Keith Yandel, who came over from the Florida Panthers. He's not coming off the greatest season, especially considering the year before he was pretty solid, at least offensively. I'm not exactly sure how this improves them, especially on the defensive end. I don't think he's all that great defensively. But at the same time, Keith Yandle's still that veteran presence, and he probably can, make that blue line more experienced and maybe improves it in some degree. They also added Rasmus Risto, who was traded over from the Buffalo Sabres. He not the greatest defenseman over there. He had some very rough years, but now coming to Philadelphia, who is Philly's a much better team, obviously. So maybe he can, be a little bit better for them and provide some more consistency on a new team. It could be a very, fresh start for him. So hopefully it works out. But as of right now, I don't necessarily see this as a great upgrade either. For this next one, I actually do. Ryan Ellis, who they acquired from the Nashville Predators. He's a very solid top 4 defenseman. He is the one guy that I'm very confident will fit in like a glove in this Flyers organization. I think he's going to be very solid on a top pair, and he looks a lot like Gritty, so it makes a lot of sense. He's got that beard game. He's a beaut. Overall assessment of these moves, I think they're decent, and I definitely think that, they definitely took some strides. They're trying to, get a little bit better, have a much better bounce back season. However, I just don't feel like these additions make the Flyers significantly better than they were last season. I thought they were already decent. They just, they tremendously underachieved. But that might just come down to their goaltending, honestly. If Carter Hart bounces back, the Flyers most definitely will be a playoff team. But at the same time, I'm just a little bit skeptical, especially if he doesn't play that well. And, Martin Jones coming in, I just don't see him as really helping out the crease all that well. And in terms of their defense, I mean, on paper, you could say it's better, but I personally don't feel it's significantly better at all. I mean, Ellis, yes, I think that's a great key addition. It's going to improve their defense. But as for Yandel and Ristolainen, I don't see that as the Flyers being a better defensive team when those two guys are on the ice. But again, that's just my opinion, and maybe they can, bounce back with changes of scenery. But for me, I'm just a little bit skeptical. So these are my predictions for who I feel the top 5 scorers will be for the Philadelphia Flyers this season. So in first, I'm going with Sean Couturier to have a very big season, 27 goals, 45 assists for 72 points. So like I hinted at before, Sean Couturier, he's underrated as hell. He can shut your ass down, but he can also contribute roughly 70 points. If healthy, obviously health has been a huge question mark for this guy over the last couple of seasons, but if he's on the ice and playing, he should contribute some very solid offense. He's just a complete package, very solid player, and he is going to help this team a ton to win games because he is just that valuable to this team. In second, I'm going with a massive bounce back candidate here, Travis Connectny, 22 goals, 40 assists for 62 points. Connectny obviously is coming off a rough year, but I do expect him to bounce back. He's still very young. I think he has a ton of potential, and he just has an ability to be better. I just think he's going to be a lot better. He should be in the 60-point range. I definitely think that's in his repertoire. I mean, as he did the year before, I believe he led the team in scoring, or he was, top 2, top 3 on the team in scoring. He was at about 60 points. So I feel like he's definitely capable of bouncing back, and especially if the Flyers are going to have a bounce back season as a whole, he is definitely going to be a key part of that success. And third, I'm going to go with Claude Giroux with 19 goals and 38 assists for 57 points. So I personally don't think Giroux is the offensive player he once was, but at the same time, he's still very solid. I would expect somewhere in between 55 to 60 points. I guess it's totally plausible he hits more than that, but for me, I'm just not sure if he's that elite offensive player that he once was. But at the same time, I mean, he just came off a relatively solid year, which he was tied for the team lead in scoring. So I could definitely be criminally underrating him. But regardless, still a very solid top 6 option. There's no question about that. Fourth, I'm going to go with Joel Fairby, having a very solid year, 26 goals and 23 assists for 49 points. I mean, he had an amazing breakout season last year, leading the team in goals and all. So I definitely feel he can replicate that, if not build on it. So I definitely feel, 20 plus goals, roughly 50 points. That seems totally fair. And you know what? If he continues his development and his upward trajectory, he can definitely achieve more than that. And in fifth, I'm going to go with James Van Riemsdyk, not quite having the same type of season, but still respectable, 21 goals and 27 assists for 48 points. I just feel like Van Riemsdyk vastly overachieved offensively. I just don't think he's going to score at that rate. I just feel like he's definitely bound to slow down. He is a little bit on the older side, although I still feel like he's still decent. I just don't expect him to be on pace for 60, 65, 70 points. I just don't see that from him. He's never really been that type of player, and he's just not that type of player. And especially, if he's going to be on a third line role, I just don't see that type of offensive production from him, in my opinion. In terms of where I feel this Flyers team stands entering this season, I mean, in years past, I would have been confident as ever. Like last season, I was very confident that they were going to have a great regular season, finish first in the division, and maybe go on a deep playoff run. But after the year they just had, I am starting to question them a little bit. I'm a little bit on the fence as what they are really. Now, it would not surprise me in the slightest if they do bounce back and make the playoffs, because that is the Flyers' nature. I mean, they miss the playoffs and they make the playoffs. It's a pattern with them over the last decade. However, like I said, I'm not fully convinced that what they did in the offseason makes them a much better team. And given what they are going in with, I'm just a little bit skeptical right now, and especially in a tough Metropolitan division. Although this might bite me, I'm going to say that they're not going to make the playoffs this season. With that, I have them finishing 6th in the Metropolitan Division with a 40, 34, and 8 record for a total of 88 points, and I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. Now, like I mentioned before, I could understand easily why many would say that this Philadelphia Flyers team is going to bounce back. I mean, they do have a ton of talent on paper, especially up front, and this is really going to come down to Carter Hart. If he can bounce back, then this Flyers team probably should make the playoffs. But if he has a very similar season, or if he's only just average, I still think it's going to be very tough for this Flyers team to make the postseason. Also, with all the moves they made, it's really just an overhaul of new players on the roster. You kind of just wonder how they fit. So for me, I'm not really sure what they're going to look like come October. So that's why I'm kind of skeptical. So I'm not going to say they make the playoffs, but again, it would not surprise me in the slightest if they did. I mean, they are the Philadelphia Flyers. They're known for bouncing back and getting back into the playoffs. I'm just not sold right now, I'll be honest. That's going to wrap up my season expectations on the Philadelphia Flyers. If you agree with my opinions and you feel like this team is not that much better and you don't think they're going to be good enough to make the playoffs, especially in a tough Metropolitan division, or do you disagree wholeheartedly with my take and you feel like this team is destined for a bounce back season and you believe in Carter Hart and you believe that he is going to have a great season and get back to form? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Consider subscribing to the channel, and I will talk to you in the next one. I'll see you guys later.